Chapter 4. At School. One morning in early September, Maudie woke to a chilly breeze coming through the open window. "Oh," she thought, "maybe summer is nearly over." The fresh air invigorated her, and she jumped happily out of bed. Skipping down the stairs, she hurried to her mother's side to see what she was preparing for breakfast. It looked like fried potatoes and eggs. Maudie felt so good that Mother did not need to remind her to set the table. She went to the cupboard, counted 8 plates, and set them around the table, 3 on each side and 1 on each end. Then she counted 8 glasses and 8 knives, spoons, and forks, and set them in their places. Next, she cut the bread and put it in the bread plate. She had the table nicely set before Father and the boys came inside for breakfast. "It sure feels good this morning, doesn't it?" Maudie exclaimed. "Sure does," Tobe agreed in his warm, mellow voice. "I guess that means it will soon be time to pick corn." "Do you know what I think it means?" grinned Gidley, as he slid into his place beside Father. "I suppose it means school time for you," Jake teased, ruffling his little brother's thick brown hair. He stepped over the bench and sat down beside him. "Yep," Gidley announced. He took a quick drink of milk from the tall glass before him. His fingers were still so short that he had to hold it with both hands. Maybe Gidley was only 4 years old, but he was going to school this year because the teacher had said he might. He would soon be 5 and was such an eager learner that Mother decided he could try it. Now with the long hot summer coming to an end, he was anxious for school to begin. Maudie and Sarah hurried about the kitchen, helping Mother dish out the food. As they were busily going from stove to table, carrying bowls of tomato gravy, fried potatoes, and eggs, Maudie suddenly noticed how heavily Mother walked. After sitting down, Maudie looked suspiciously at her. Suddenly, she understood that Mother was expecting a baby. After the silent prayer, each one thanking God for their blessings, Maudie again looked at Mother and noticed the tired lines beneath her eyes. Weariness seemed evident in every movement, yet no one heard a word of complaint cross her lips. Maudie wondered if a new baby would mean she couldn't go to school. Oh, she hoped it wouldn't come to that. But she knew that Sarah liked school too, so maybe they would take turns. Then she thought of the tiny baby they would have and hoped it would be another girl, like baby Mary. How they enjoyed her, and she knew they would love the new baby too. But having babies was something no one talked about, so Maudie kept her discovery to herself. She did not even talk to Sarah about it. She only resolved within herself, as she had done so many times before, to work harder for Mother's sake. A week later, Father came home from a barn raising and announced that school was scheduled to begin the next Monday. Maudie hugged the news to herself and smiled. Jake slapped Gidley on the back and asked loudly, "Are you going to play hooky next Monday, Gidley?" "Nope, I'm not going to miss even one day this whole school year," he said importantly. "I'm going to go every day, no matter what." And Gidley tried hard to keep his promise. On the first day of school, he told the teacher, Miss McDonald, that he was going to try to come every day. Of course, this greatly pleased her. Maudie wished she could come every day too, but she knew that would not be possible with a new baby coming. 2 children shared the same desk, and this year her desk partner was Elsie Yoder. Maudie thought Elsie had the prettiest blonde hair she had ever seen. It reminded her of tender corn silks. The flat desktop was hinged at the front and lifted up so the students could keep their books and slates inside. If each kept her end of the desk neat and clean, then all was well. But if one was sloppy, a partition needed to be built of books to keep the 2 sides separated. At the ends of the desk were thick scrolls of black iron wrought into beautiful curlicues. Maudie loved the feel of the smooth wood and hard black iron. She enjoyed the scratching noises of her white chalk on her slate, and the large oak desk that belonged to Teacher, the pot-bellied stove in the center of the room, and the water bucket inside the door with its cool tin dipper. These all filled her with excitement. Their lunch pails, actually syrup and lard buckets, lined the shelf in the back of the room. 2 weeks after school began, baby Elizabeth was born. She was small and thin, but her brothers and sisters thought she was the most beautiful baby in the world. Her tiny, moist hands had wrinkles in just the right places, and her toes stuck straight out whenever they stroked her feet. She had soft, downy hair that clung to her forehead in damp curls. How the family loved her, and how their hearts ached to hear her cry and cry and cry. Something was wrong with Elizabeth, but no one knew what it could be. Mother made poultices of oats, salt, and onions and put them on her chest. She gave her various medicines, fed her teas, and seemingly nursed her around the clock, but all to no avail. Sarah didn't go to school at all anymore, and many times Gidley went alone. But Maudie did not care. All that mattered now was Elizabeth. Her illness brought sadness that chased all their laughter away. The days seemed long, and darkness fell too quickly. Many times, Father stood beside the bassinet and clumsily, yet tenderly, patted her back. One day in mid-December, Father came home from his carpentry job in the middle of the week. With him was a tall, dark-haired man who carried a black satchel. Father had walked all the way to Buckland to get the doctor, and his presence made the world seem brighter. Maudie heard Mother sigh with relief and noticed her eyes fill with sudden tears. Tenderly, the doctor took the baby and looked into her mouth. Then he felt her stomach and took her temperature. Elizabeth did not even stir or whimper. He grasped her hand, but she did not return his grip. Gently he laid her back in Mother's lap, bent down and opened his black bag. Maudie leaned out as far as she dared and tried to see into its cavernous opening. All she saw were medicine bottles and a shiny, long-nosed scissors. From deep inside its middle he retrieved a stethoscope. Maudie did not know what it was or what he intended to do with it. He stopped his ears with its two long handles, and Maudie watched him lift little Elizabeth's cotton kimono and press the round, shiny end to her chest. For the first time, Maudie noticed her baby sister's labored breathing. Her tiny chest rose sharply, then fell flat. Rose again, and fell. Maudie looked at Mother. Then she looked at Father. Finally, she gazed long and hard at the doctor. They all wore the same grave expression, and in that long instant, Maudie knew that her sister might die. Sudden tears filled her eyes, and she spun around, trying to leave the room. Dan followed, and the two stumbled outside to sit on the porch steps. "Do you think Elizabeth will die?" Maudie asked, sobs nearly choking her. Dan looked away before answering. "No," he answered softly. "The doctor knows what to do." But Maudie saw tears in his eyes and knew that he feared the worst too. They heard the doctor speaking to Mother in low, even tones, telling her how to give Elizabeth the medicine he was leaving. Shortly, he and Father stepped out of the house and stood by the gate in hushed conversation. The family pinned their hopes on the medicine which the doctor had left. They hovered over Elizabeth in an effort to will her to health. How desperately they wanted her to get well and sing and clap her hands as Mary now did. But it was not to be. The very next morning, December 15, 1910, their little darling died. She had fought a long, hard battle and lost. Now She was back with God, playing in the golden streets. The family reeled in grief, and many were the tears that fell that week. When Elizabeth died, it seemed that the whole world stopped and time stood still. Yet, the family knew they had to pick up the pieces of their lives and go on. Work was the very fabric of their existence, so Father returned to his carpentry job. The children returned to school, and Tobe, Mother, and Mary carried on alone at home. Many times Maudie saw Mother sitting quietly in the rocker with eyes closed and knew she was praying. One day, when she was looking especially sad, Maudie asked why God had let Elizabeth die. Mother looked away before answering. "It's best this way, Maudie. She had so much pain, and God knew how much she could bear. The Bible says so." She paused and then continued. "There are lots of things we don't understand. We just have to trust God, Maudie." Maudie wished for Mother's strength and courage, and most of all, for her faith. Winter came with all its fury and swept the world clean and white. The days passed with much snow and little sunshine. Apart from the usual chores, there was not much work to do. The last Friday of January was cold and cloudy. Snow would surely fall before evening. The last Friday of every month was special at school, because after lunch they had a spelling bee. The children hoped the snow would not fall before the spelling bee was over. The stove in the center of the room sputtered and sizzled. White clouds of smoke drifted down outside the windows. Maudie and Elsie's desk was near the window, and they were shivering from the cold. Occasionally, icy drafts of air whooshed through the cracks and sent chills up their spines. But the children on either side of the stove were wet with sweat. Maudie wished they could trade places. But when school was in session, no one spoke unless spoken to. So Maudie said not a word. When it was time for the spelling bee, the two girls made sure they stood by the stove. There were two lines of children facing each other. First, one side was given a word, and the person on the head end of the row got the first chance to spell it. If the pupil couldn't spell the word, that one had to sit down, and a person from the other side tried to spell it. Once the word was correctly spelled by one side, the next person on the other side got a word. They all enjoyed the spelling bees, even those who sat down first. The following Monday morning, Maudie awoke to a terrible howling of the wind. When she opened her eyes, she saw snow flying so thick she could not see the fence posts or even the barn. The whole world was white and cold. After she went downstairs to help Mother with breakfast, she learned that they would not go to school that day. It was snowing and blowing much too hard. When Gidley heard this, he sat on a kitchen chair and cried loudly. "Shh, Gidley, don't cry so," Mother chided him. "You know you can't go to school in this snow." "But I told teacher I wouldn't miss even one day. Can't I go, please?" he begged. "No," Mother said firmly. "It's not safe to be out." So Gidley pushed his chair up to the window. With tears streaming down his cheeks and sobs shaking his shoulders, he watched the driving snow. It blew in hard, straight lines before the wind. In the corner by the cellar door, it swirled in gentle heaps. Soon Tobe, Dan, and Jake burst through the kitchen door, out of breath and shaking snow from their clothes. They had bedded down the animals, fed and watered them, and made sure the barn was bolted tightly shut. Now they would have a day of leisure until the storm died down. "What's wrong, Gidley?" Tobe asked him. "When it rains, it pours, huh?" He pulled off his boots and placed them behind the stove to dry. Then he shrugged out of his coat and threw it over the back of a chair. He sat down beside his brother and tried his best to bring a smile back to the usually sunny face. But Gidley would not be comforted. He wanted to go to school, yet Mother said he mustn't. He wouldn't have thought to argue with her. Suddenly he saw the dim shape of Father wading through the snow. Because of the bad weather, he had decided to come back home. As soon as he entered the front door, Mary grabbed his legs and clung so tightly that he could hardly get his overcoat off. Then, picking her up and setting her on his shoulders, he looked around the room for Gidley. There he was, sitting by the window, with tears still on his cheeks. Tobe gave him a knowing smile. "Well," Father exclaimed in his booming voice, "what's Gidley crying about, Mother?" "He wants to go to school," Mother explained. "But I felt it isn't safe. It's just snowing and blowing too hard." Father looked out the window. Then his gaze rested on his small son. How he hated to see his little sunbeam looking like a snow cloud. "Oh, let him go if he wants to that bad," he finally said. With that, Gidley jumped off the chair. Without saying a word, he grabbed his coat and ran out the door. Mother hurried after him and warned him not to leave the road. The words were hardly out of her mouth when he disappeared, running down the lane and away to school. About 11 o'clock, Miss McDonald looked up and saw him coming. She jumped up from her chair, cheered, and told the other pupils to look out the window. So they jumped up and cheered too. The teacher hurried to the door, helped him up the steps, and led him to the stove to warm. Gidley smiled. He was at school, and that was all that mattered. End chapter 4.